Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this narration of the web series Beyond the Void, taken from Reddit. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed in the description, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 6, Gauche Point of View. In major points of commerce and tourism, docking stations stretched as far as the eye could see, with entire cities built around them to accommodate travelers. By comparison, the cavernous hangar on Cover 9 was rather modest. An unwitting passerby might mistake it for a warehouse. The port's main occupants were cargo freighters on their regular supply runs, and the occasional charter craft. The only visitor came to see family, and they usually didn't stay long. Nobody wanted to stay on a poor, shrinking colony unless they had nowhere else to go. The three Covian custom officers looked up surprised to see a military vessel, armed to the teeth with weapons, descending into their little port. I expected more terror at the sight of a human warship, but I suppose these people realized their planet was too meager of a prize to appeal to the Earthlings. As we prepared to disembark, I considered leaving my gun behind. It would be a nuisance to lug a heavy rifle around. This trio didn't seem like they would pose any trouble to our party. I began to place the rifle back onto the weapons cart, but Joffy pushed it back into my paws. "You're an idiot, Gosh," she growled. "A bunch of humans got mauled chasing this ship, and you want to run up to it defenseless. It's sitting in a tiny idle port. It's days before the disaster." I gestured out the viewport towards the customs officers on the ground. "I count 3 of them, and about 100 of us. What's the worst that could happen?" She glared at me. "You've already seen the worst that can happen, but you do what you want." With a sigh, I hoisted my rifle back onto my shoulders. My senses had tightened, and my exhaustion had faded. But there was also an unusual agitation steering my thoughts. I felt invincible, ready to run 1,000 clicks, with the newfound energy surging through my veins. I felt alive. Perhaps the brown drink Rykov gave me had been drugged. Now that I considered it, he had all but admitted that it was some sort of mind-altering substance. The dark-haired human was standing by the airlock, looking rather displeased with General Blaise. That did not bode well for our team's cooperation. Bickering between the galaxy's 2 most aggressive species could easily end in violence. General Rykov's voice was low, but with my species-sharp hearing, I was able to make out the words. "And why exactly are you in charge? Last time I checked, I outranked you." "The Covian government is less than thrilled with the Terran warship landing on their territory," Blaise answered. "They're worried that you might leave a trail of bodies in your wake. They think that you're on another, crusade?" "Another crusade? When have we ever attacked the Federation?" There was a hint of anger in Rykov's voice, and I noticed him clenching his fists. "We have never raised a finger against you. Lord knows we could have." "I beg to differ. There are several instances that come to mind, like Kylon." The human recoiled as though he had been slapped. Clearly, there was a subtext that I did not understand. General Kylon had been Rykov's predecessor, a Jatari officer who was killed in action during the war. The venom in Blaise's voice suggested that he blamed the Terrans for his comrade's death, or he believed something more nefarious was afoot. "How dare you!" Rykov spat. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I was his first officer." "I know plenty." Blaise's antennae twisted together, as though he was trying to calm himself. "Look, I'm trying to help you. Announcing yourself as Terran military won't open a lot of doors, whereas the Jatari were respected. Just for once, let me do the talking." Before the human could offer any protest, Blaise pulled the door handle and started down the landing ramp. After a brief moment of hesitation, Rykov followed, with the rest of our entourage in tow. The customs officers at the bottom barely looked up from her helipad, despite the presence of 50 armed personnel. Again, her lack of emotion struck me as odd, as did the fact that her partners had vanished. "Greetings, I am Skitali. Please state your nature of your visit." "Military business. We're here to confiscate a Terran ship under the name Pisces," Blaise said. "For what reason?" Skitali said. "Not your concern. Take us there now, or you'll be an enemy of the Jatari." "Do you have a warrant? You can't." Blaise waved a pistol at her, pressing it against her neck. "Here's my warrant. Move!" The Jatari general's brutish methods sickened me. No civilized soldier would resort to threats and bullying without any provocation. Here was the proof that the aggressive species were only as good as their reputation, right in front of me. I rested the glass at Rykov and noticed that he looked appalled, as I felt. Why would it bother the human? Blizz! Rykov's voice dropped an octave, and it didn't escape my notice that he felt a general's title. Put that weapon down, or I will put you down. Will you? There was a click as the human removed the safety on his gun. Last warning. This is not how we treat civilians under my command. With a furious snarl, Blizz lowered his weapon and turned all three eyes towards Rykov. If looks could have killed, the human would have moved and melted to a puddle, then and there. The Terran general took a deep breath, trying to collect himself. I apologize for my subordinate, Skatali. I'll be having some stern words with him later, I assure you. She nodded, strangely unperturbed. It's all right. As I was saying, do you have a warrant? By law, I can't allow you to inspect or seize property without it. I understand. I would never have asked you to break the law if it weren't an emergency. Thousands of lives are at stake. There was no time to go through traditional channels, not without how backlogged your courts are. We do have a direct permission from the Kovian government. Sir, I'm sorry, but the politicians don't have that kind of authority. You're right. We'll go through the proper steps as soon as we can. But right now we need your help. If we don't get to the ship in time, innocent people will die. Please, I'm begging you. Well, just this once, fine. Follow me. General Rykov nodded his gratitude and followed Skatali towards the cordoned-off hangar at the back of the building. His behavior with her reminded me of the human we used to know, diplomatic, meek, docile. But then he dropped back a bit, falling in at Blizz's side, and the illusion dissolved. The rage smoldering in his brown eyes was primal. You were worried about me leaving a trail of bodies. You were going to talk. What was that? The human hissed. Everything was under control until you interfered. I wasn't going to hurt her. Blizz shook his head, refusing to look at the human. She wasn't cooperating. All that was needed was a bit of intimidation. You know, remind the rent-a-cops of their place. You can't show weakness like that. That groveling was pathetic, an embarrassment to your kind. Rykov chuckled. An embarrassment for asking nicely. Yes, it's a wonder that you ever got such a high rank. I was thinking the same about you. As worrisome as the thought of fisticuffs breaking out between two officers was, I found myself distracted by other concerns. The nagging thought lingered at the back of my mind that Skatali had complied a bit too easily. It was as though she had only been stalling for time. Where had her partners gone? Maybe it was just the coffee drugs creating anxiety, but this did not pass the smell test. The customs officer pressed a button to open the hangar. The metal door slowly slid aside. I made out a few dozen silhouettes, crouching in firing positions. The majority of armed forces appeared to be human, which was rather unusual for the middle-of-nowhere colony. Well, that explained where the partners had gone to round up the rest of the crew. Acting on instinct, I tugged Joffrey to the ground. Not a second later, gunfire erupted around us. Blood splattered onto my nose as a plasma round tore through a human soldier in front of me. He dropped to the floor with a sickening thud, splayed out with a burgeoning pool of crimson. Shock pulsed through my chest as I realized how close that was to being me. Around us, several others fell, and more stumbled from non-fatal hits. Our attackers had gotten the drop on us with the ambush. Our surviving troops scrambled for cover, diving behind loose shipping containers and stray objects. Skatali was nowhere to be seen, so I assumed she rejoined her buddies once the fighting broke out. Our enemies noticed a group of Terran soldiers crouched behind a refreshment station and tossed a round object towards them. The humans seemed to recognize the device and scrambled out of the hiding spot. Perhaps it was some sort of tool meant to flush out stowaways, but the tiny ball looked harmless. The device detonated as soon as the thought crossed my mind. Despite its puny size, it unleashed a forceful blast that took down all in its vicinity. Right. Everything with humans involved, explosions. How could I forget? Bits of shrapnel rained out from the epicenter, maiming anyone who lacked shelter. This was a butcher's weapon, intended to inflict pain and suffering. I saw one human crawling away, dragging the blood-soaked remnants of a leg behind her. My knowledge of xenobiology was hazy, but if memory served me right, humans weren't capable of limb regrowth. What did they do with their wounded and impaired? Didn't they have a saying, only the strong survive? Perhaps the Terrans would just leave this one to die. since it was doubtful that she could walk again. Gosh! With a quick glance, I saw Joffrey crawling towards the stout metal container where Rykov, Blez, and a few other men were waving us over. She seemed to have called my name several times. Are you going to just lay there, watching? Get your ass over here! I wriggled over to the makeshift shelter, propping myself against the cool surface. Rykov and Blez were crouched side by side, quarrel forgotten, returning fire. Facing off against a force that was primarily humans didn't bode well for me. But it was better than sitting back on my paws. I reached for my rifle and peered over the container with my scope. If I was to die on the mission, I might as well go down shooting. End of chapter. The algorithm reckons you should be watching this video next, and I recommend that you should be always watching my video. So, click with energy! And yes, clicking that does help the channel. Thank you very much. I just quickly want to thank the Tier 5 patrons and channel members: Alithia Barkey, Cam Maxwell, Casper Arnholtz, Albarden Guster, Arcadian, Lord Azrakal, and Joachim Backer.